Good afternoon. I'm here with Roger Tarbutton, candidate for Overland Park City Council, Ward 2. On behalf of the Johnson County Public Policy Council, thank you, Roger, for being here today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
The Johnson County Public Policy Council is made up of 10 chambers of commerce in Johnson County. Our goal is to provide information about public policy issues impacting area businesses. You ready to get started?
Let's go.
In regard to economic development, it's been argued that incentives aren't necessary because development will occur naturally without them being offered. What is your opinion?
I believe that absolutely we will have plenty of good development without the use of extensive tax incentives. I think that they're currently being overused. I do believe that throughout Overland Park's history, plenty of development has occurred naturally without the use of tax incentives. I think most development even today occurs without the use of tax incentives. It's only for special projects generally that they're used. So I think that developers have come to demand more and more in the way of tax incentives for these large projects. I do believe that those demands are not necessary. I think that tax incentives can overstimulate development in certain areas. I think that we're better off if we just rely upon market conditions and allow the businessmen to analyze those conditions and determine if they can make a profit through their developments, and I think that's a more natural way for development to occur. I recognize there are situations where tax incentives are useful in special circumstances, and but I think those are few and far between, and I think that we've gone overboard in using tax incentives. I think that more important than tax incentives for development are things like, do we have adequate infrastructure for development? Do we have good schools, a good educated workforce, good vital neighborhoods for people to live in? Good public services are offered through the city, police protection, fire, at reasonable tax rates. I think these are all more important factors than our tax incentives in attracting good development. So I think that we should focus as a city on maintaining these types of services.
Okay. What is your opinion on what is commonly referred to as Darkstar theory, and what do you think Overland Park should be doing today, if anything, to prepare for rulings that favor the plaintiffs?
Right. I do believe that the Darkstar theory is a threat should the plaintiffs win. I believe it is a threat to our budget. It would result in a reduced real estate tax revenue because it would take a lot of the big box stores and reduce the amount of tax that can be collected from real estate taxes. So it is a future threat. It's also a past threat because if the plaintiffs should win, we may have to actually refund taxes that were collected in past years. I don't recall how many years they could go back, but I think they could go back 2 or 3 years and try to get refunds. And so I think that we do need to recognize that threat to our budget. As a result, I think that we need to establish a contingency fund in order to meet that demand if it should occur in the future. I think maybe we should start diverting some of our surplus funds from our reserve into a contingency fund in order to meet that type of a threat in the future.
Housing affordability is addressed in Forward OP, and it's a topic of considerable discussion among employers. What do you think the City of Overland Park should be doing to address this problem?
Right, I agree that housing affordability is becoming an increasing problem both in the City of Overland Park and generally in Johnson County, and I think it does need to be focused on and addressed. I think we should address and focus on the causes of that shortage in affordable housing and also ways to ameliorate it. I think one cause that we ought to look at is the overuse of tax incentives for the development of luxury apartments. I think that we've generally built a lot of luxury apartments in the county recently using tax incentives, and I think that the high rents that result from these luxury apartments can drive up the unaffordable housing. So I think we need to look at that as a factor that contributes to unaffordable housing. I think we also need to focus on working with Johnson County. It provides most of the funding for subsidies for housing within the county. I think there may be ways that the city can actually coordinate more with Johnson County and also offer supplemental programs that would tie in with the general programs that they offer. So I do believe that we need to do more to address affordable housing, and that's something that we could possibly use some tax incentives for stimulating affordable housing through rehabilitation of existing homes or the development of new housing. So I think that that's a possibility to use our tax incentives that way, but I would be opposed to using further tax incentives to build more luxury types of apartments.
In the short term, it appears we can keep our mill levy unchanged to meet current budget obligations. However, sluggish sales tax collections and increased demands on infrastructure from growth could necessitate a change. What are your thoughts on our current budget and the outlook for the future?
Yes, I do believe we have some clouds in the budget horizon. We also, we previously addressed a little bit the Darkstar litigation that could have an effect on future budgets. Also, as you mentioned, there is a reduction in the amount of sales tax revenue that we've been receiving, which will have an impact on the future budgets. So I think that we need to take these into consideration. I think we need to be more fiscally responsible and adopt leaner budgets in the future in order to address these types of situations. As previously indicated on the Darkstar theory litigation, I think we need to establish a contingency fund to meet that threat and use some of our reserves for that, rather than using reserves for future budgets as we have been in the past. I also think that we need to basically have a leaner budget, try and find ways to be more efficient, possibly cutting out some of the use of outside consultants for work that could be done in-house and that sort of thing. So I do believe that we need to recognize these threats to the budget and we need to address them.
The governors of Kansas and Missouri have recently forged a truce in the so-called economic border war. Do you support their actions, and what impact do you believe their agreement will have on Overland Park?
Yes, I do believe that that's a good agreement. I think that it will benefit cities on both sides of the state line, Kansas and Missouri. I think currently developers have played off cities on each side of the state line and trying to build up the amount of tax incentives that they can get. And I think that that's detrimental to the city as a whole and to the metropolitan area. It's interesting, Kansas, through its statutes, has a similar provision in place that just applies to cities within the state of Kansas to try to prevent them from, in essence, poaching businesses from each other through the use of tax incentives. And so I think this is just kind of an extension of that particular model, and I think it will turn out to be extremely beneficial. One of the problems we have in the past is even if a city on one side of state line is successful in enticing a business to relocate, oftentimes these businesses over the years seem to jump back and forth across state lines, and so sometimes the benefits that were promised never materialize. So I think this is a good agreement, and I believe it will be beneficial.
Roger, as we wrap up, tell us why you're seeking public office. What do you believe most distinguishes you from your opponent in the race and making you best suited to serve?
Yes, the main reason that I wanted to run was I really am interested in providing a voice for the citizens and residents of Overland Park at city council meetings. I was shocked when I started attending meetings and discovered that currently there is no public comment period, there is no open mic period before city council meetings. And for that matter, I don't believe that it exists either at the committee level. And I've personally witnessed meetings where residents showed up at these meetings wanting to speak and were unable to do so. Sometimes they have to carry signs and placards in an attempt to let the city council know what their thoughts and concerns are. And I just don't feel that this is right in our democracy. I feel people should have the right to speak out. So I'm in favor of the immediate adoption of a public comment period before city council meetings. I don't think it's something that requires a lot of study. Most of the surrounding cities and counties, for that matter, in the metropolitan area already have such practices implemented. I think it's a simple procedure to look at their ordinances and adopt a model based upon that. So I would be in favor of immediate adoption of that. My opponent has called for additional study before such an ordinance is adopted. To me, I don't think that's necessary. Another reason that I'm running is that I'm opposed to the use of a lot of tax incentives to spur development. I think that development should be based upon market conditions. I think that we will attract a lot of development to Overland Park just based on having a good infrastructure and those other factors that contribute to development. I don't think we need to use the tax incentives. I think that's basically a waste of the taxpayers' money in most circumstances. My opponent is a big supporter of the use of tax incentives, and he has stated that he feels like if we don't extend tax incentives, developers will take their business and go elsewhere, and that we should contribute toward the developers getting a reasonable return on their investment. Otherwise, they will not invest in the city of Overland Park. I disagree with that. I think that the city should not be considering the impact of tax incentives on the return on investment for businesses. I think that's strictly a business function. Another thing where I differ from my opponent is in the use or approval of massive types of development that I feel would have a negative impact on surrounding neighborhoods. I think we need to protect our neighborhoods, and I think that huge developments that would have a negative impact on surrounding neighborhoods would be detrimental for the city at large. And for instance, the huge Brook Ridge project that my opponent has endorsed and voted in favor of, both for the project and for the tax incentives to stimulate that project, I feel like that project is just too massive for that particular area. It may be suitable for another area of the city, but I think that particular area is too massive. And my opponent has stated he feels like this huge project, it's a live, work, play type of a project, is necessary for the city of Overland Park to compete with other cities. I feel like that our biggest priority should be to protect our existing city infrastructure and neighborhoods and make certain that those are protected as opposed to being concerned about competing with other cities.
Well, Roger, thanks for joining us this afternoon, and we wish you the best of luck with the election.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.